Hello, my wonderful friends. Megas here on a beautiful day. Welcome back to the library. We're in chapter 3, To Kill a Mockingbird. I am loving this so much. I talked to my son this week and he read it in high school. My daughter read it in high school. I don't think I would have appreciated this in high school though, but I am loving this so much right now. I love these characters. I love how 3 chapters in, I feel like I know them and I love them. Chapter 3. This is kind of funny to see a different side of Scout. So here, this far, I've seen her is very mature, but I believe it's because of her words being raised by her lawyer father and Calpurnia. Is that her name? What is she exactly? Is she a maid? Is she like a nanny? I don't know, but she's definitely in the rearing of the children. But here we see her being a 6-year-old with a 6-year-old's reasoning because she uses these mature words and she seems so reasonable. But here she's going back to her age. It says, and this is her speaking, of course, catching Walter Cunningham in the schoolyard gave me some pleasure. But when I was rubbing his nose in the dirt, Jem came by and told me to stop. You're bigger than he is, he said. He's as old as you are nearly, I said, and he made me start off on the wrong foot. Excuse me, let him go, Scout. Why? He didn't have a lunch, I said, and explained my involvement in Walter's dietary affairs. So you remember in chapter 2, because Walter didn't have a lunch, no fault of his own. His parents just don't have any money. He's never had a lunch, never will have a lunch. And but it made her get in an argument with a teacher. And so now she's mad at Scout for not having lunch. And so she's beating him up. And it makes sense to her 6-year-old mind because there would have been no confrontation if he had had a lunch. So I had to laugh at that. It makes her seem a little more human, a little more age appropriate. And then she stomped at him to chase him away like a dog or something, try to spook him. But then Jem, so this Jem is a gem of a soul. He says, Jem suddenly grinned at him. Come on home to dinner with us, Walter, he said. We'd be glad to have you. Walter's face brightened. And then he said, Scout here, she's crazy. She won't fight you anymore. And she says, I wouldn't be too certain of that. Jem's free dispensation of my pledge irked me. Now she's talking again in this grown-up language. Let's see. So now they're there, they're eating. And then Walter interrupted to ask if there's any molasses in the house. So Calpurnia, she goes and brings some molasses. It says Walter poured syrup on his vegetables, his meat, all over. She said he would have poured it into his milk if I had not asked him what the Sam Hill he was doing. The silver saucer clattered when he replaced the pitcher, and he quickly put his hands in his lap. Then he ducked his head. So he's ashamed. He just realized, oh, he must not be doing something right, and he's embarrassed. So Atticus looks at her and shakes his head in disapproval. But now Calpurnia, she'll probably going to do a little more than shake her head at her. So she's very politely request her presence in the kitchen. And then all hell breaks loose, right? There's some folks who don't eat like us, but you ain't called upon to contradict them at the table. That boy's your company, and if he wants to eat up the tablecloth, you let him, you hear? He ain't company, Cal. He's just a Cunningham. Hush your mouth. Don't matter who they are. Anybody that sets foot in this house is your company. I love that southern speech. And then Calpurnia sent me through the swinging door to the dining room with a stinging smack. I retrieved my plate, finished dinner in the kitchen, thankfully, though, that I was spared the humiliation of having to face them again. So now she's complaining to Atticus about Calpurnia, and it's probably time to let her go, and stuff, and she'll feel bad one day when she's dead, and so on. Now they're back at school, and they hear a scream. It's Miss Caroline, and her face is flooded with horror. Little Chuck grinned broadly. There ain't no need to fear a cootie, ma'am. Ain't you ever seen one? So I don't know what a cootie is. I remember in elementary school, like the girls had cooties, but I guess this is a real thing that crawled out of this kid's hair. It says little Chuck Little was another member of the population who didn't know where his next meal was coming from, but he was born a gentleman. He put his hand under her elbow and led Miss Carolyn to the front of the room. Now, don't you fret, ma'am, he said. There ain't no need to fear a cootie. I'll just fetch you some cool water. These kids, they're so grown up, so mature, but so small. It's adorable. Now, Burris, this kid is mean as a snake, and she asked him to go home and clean his hair with lye soap, that he was the filthiest human she had ever seen, and to take a bath. And Burris said, he laughed rudely. You ain't sending me home, missus. I was on the verge of leaving. I'd done my time for the year. And so he had to go because the truant officer makes you go, but now he's just going to be checked off absent for the rest of the year, and he's getting a little mouthy and cursing her, and so she ends up just breaking down and crying, and now the other kids are going to come and comfort her, which I thought was so sweet. Let's see. Oh, so Burris is leaving, but he waited till he made sure she was crying, that he had done his job. Soon we were all clustered around her desk, trying in our various ways to comfort her. He's a real mean one. Below the belt, you ain't called on to teach folk like that. Them ain't Maycomb ways, Miss Caroline, not really. Now don't you fret, ma'am, Miss Caroline. Why don't you read us a story? That cat thing was real fine this morning. Miss Caroline smiled, blew her nose, said, thank you, darlings, dispersed us upon, opened a book, and mystified the first grade with a long narrative about Toad Frog that lived in a hall. These kids are so sweet, so mature for their age. Let's see, what else did I underline here? Oh, so this is the first time that Calpurnia has been without anyone else in the house, because Scout was always with her, at least within earshot, playing around the house, and said, Calpurnia bent down and kissed me. I ran along wondering what had come over her. She had wanted to make up with me, that was it. She had always been too hard on me. She had at last seen the error of her ways. She was sorry and too stubborn to say so. I was weary from the day's crimes. The way she talks, I was weary from the day's crimes. She had to deal with Calpurnia, the things at school. Oh my goodness, life, the drama. Oh, let's see. Now she's trying to convince Atticus that she's just going to go ahead and stay home now and just be taught by him in homeschool, and explaining to him how he never went to school, and Atticus became a lawyer and very successful, and she's just going to follow in his footsteps. And Atticus isn't having it and said, one, he's too busy making a living, and these days you have to go to school or the sheriff's going to come for him. And then he tried to explain about, well, Burris doesn't have to go, right? She's telling him Burris don't have to go, and he's explaining that the sheriff kind of turns a blind eye to his crimes because he's not like normal folk. He's an alcoholic, and the sheriff and the judge, and they have a heart, and they don't want the kids to suffer, so they let him poach animals in off season, even though they're totally against it, and they let his kids not go to school and work around the farm. Just because there's no other way. There's no one else that's going to take care of the kids. And so they just kind of turn an eye to it. And then he says something pretty beautiful here. He says, if you can learn a simple trick, Scout, you'll get along a lot better with all kinds of folks. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. And Isn't that the truth? And I think that's what I love about reading and reading good books like this. You climb into other fictitious characters' skin and live out all these different possibilities. Things you'd have to, if you believe in reincarnation, come back time after time after time to learn these lessons, to understand. You could just read a bunch of good books and kind of broaden your understanding of people and life and circumstances and why people act the way they do, why people do things the way they do. I thought it was pretty beautiful, pretty deep. Oh, let's see. Anything else stick out to me? Atticus kept us in fits reading columns of print about a man who sat on a flagpole for no discernible reason. So then the next day, Jem gets an idea that he's going to sit up in the treehouse all day and never leave, just like the man sitting on the flagpole. And so Scout keeps running him out food and water and things to read. But Jem said, "Oh, I'm never coming down." Atticus says, "Well, just don't take him any more stuff. He'll come down on his own." And so she didn't bring him any more food, water, or stuff. And he came back into the house. And that takes us into chapter 4. But are you guys loving this? Have you caught up yet? I know some of you were saying how I finished the Little Paris Bookshop. I read 100 pages in that last day because I had to know what was going on. And then I jumped right into this. So I took yesterday off to let people start to catch up. I'll be putting these in a playlist so you can catch up here. But it shouldn't be too hard. And then if you don't have your book yet, you can go like on YouTube and just type in To Kill a Mockingbird audiobook, and it's in the public domain, and there'll be someone reading it to you, and you can follow along till your book comes. All right, guys, I love you so much, and we'll see you next time.